Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, good night. I don't know when you're listening. I'm just some guy in a room with a microphone somewhere. But whenever you're listening, I am sure thankful that you're listening to Unpopular Opinions on the You, Me, and BTC network. Before we get in, I just want to mention a quick word about today's sponsor, eToro. eToro makes crypto trading easy. Access the world's most popular digital currencies with low fees and social trading features in one simple app. Connect with the community, sharing strategies and insights, follow real-time market trends on the newsfeed, and view the portfolios of 10 million users worldwide. And if you're not comfortable enough jumping in right now and putting a bunch of your hard-earned money into cryptocurrencies, then eToro is for you too, because they have a feature to do an experiment portfolio where they give you 100,000 fake dollars, and then you can invest those however you see fit and just try out some strategies to try to grow your money in crypto. Use this imaginary money first, and then once you're feeling confident, once you've got it all nailed down, jump over, put some real money in there. eToro makes it as easy as can be. Anyway, guys, I'm Ryan Toffel, and this is another episode of Unpopular Opinions. Today, we're trying something new, mostly because Brian sucks, Dan sucks, whoever's in here with me, it's just not good, so I'm going to do it by myself. I'm just kidding about that. I'm so thankful for anybody who gets on here with me for even just one episode and can put up with me. But today, we've got a solo episode. We're going to see how it goes. And in this solo episode, I'm just going to talk about things that I like, okay? I like sports and I like video games. So today, I was reading an article from tiebreaker.com about history's 30 greatest sports video games. And I just wanted to go through there and give you guys a little bit of my opinion on each of these games. So it doesn't appear to be in any particular order. They just got a paragraph or two written about all these games. And starting off the list, they have Pong. And I think while some people may see that as kind of like a cheap shot, like, oh, Pong, think about what Pong was when it came out in 1972. You may be thinking like, oh, this is too easy. This is not just like, it's not a real game. You're just bouncing this ball back and forth. But people had never seen anything like this. It was like a movie or a TV show that they were then interacting with and controlling the outcome of, which is the main reason that I like video games more than any other medium, really. I don't mind listening to the radio, but I don't watch any movies. I don't watch any television besides live sports. My preferred medium that I consume my media in, my media medium, is video games. And without Pong, none of this would have ever been possible. It's the one that started it all. It doesn't just have a special place in the heart of sports gamers, but gamers everywhere. If you play video games at any point in time in your life, you owe a thank you to Pong. Like the number of hours that you've put into Call of Duty or World of Warcraft or Madden, regardless of what you feel about these games these days, even if you just played them as a kid, you should be thankful to Pong, because Pong coming out and being the success that it was and just really revolutionizing an entire medium. Like people didn't know what a video game was. It wasn't the first video game ever, but it was the first video game that was available to a widespread audience, and it's the first video game that became really popular. It's the earliest video game that you could still say today, and people know what you're talking about. Moving on to the 1987 release, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! And Tiebreaker says that the first rendition of the classic boxing game, Punch-Out!, dropped in 1983 at the arcade, spawning a bunch of hit spin-offs like those weird arm wrestling machines. What really launched this game into fame was when Nintendo released Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! In 1987. This is kind of a weird game to me to be considered one of the greatest for a system, which it is, but it's such a niche game on most consoles. Like, you've got to really, really, really enjoy boxing to get into boxing on any other console generation. Even just the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis that came out 5 years after this, you needed to really enjoy boxing to get entertainment out of these boxing games that were coming out on those systems. Not counting Super Punch-Out, of course, because that followed in the footsteps of his predecessor in that everybody was playing Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. It doesn't matter if you liked boxing. It doesn't matter if you like sports. It doesn't matter if you liked Mike Tyson. This was such a fun game. And the way Little Mac controlled and moved in and out, you really, really, really felt like an underdog, but you felt like you could do it. It was like if you were controlling the movie Rocky, but it wasn't so unbelievable that your person would win. Because even though you're so much smaller than all of the other characters, the way you control and the way you face easier fighters in the very, very beginning of the game, it makes you feel like Little Mac is like a credible threat. And as you start beating more and more boxers, you just feel better about it and it becomes more fun to pull off these combos against more difficult opponents. And that's something that I really enjoy about video games, is it seems that video games are as deep as you want to make them. I know one of my favorite games ever is Crash Team Racing, and a lot of people pick that up and they'll think it's just like a Mario Kart clone. But the more you play Crash Team Racing, the more of the game that opens up to you. And what I mean by that is there are certain skill milestones that you're not going to hit until you've played the game for a little bit, and then it kind of opens up new opportunities and new ways to play the game. And that's the way Mike Tyson's Punch-Out was, is you could just get in there and face off against Glass Joe and spam a bunch of the buttons, but to really progress into the game, you had to get the technique and the skill down. And as you got better at the game, it became more complex. Now, I know that this seems really, really obvious to somebody like, oh yeah, of course, the more you would play it, like things have to progress in the game and become more difficult. That's the way things are. But seeing this in a sports game back in 1987 wasn't necessarily the way that all other games were doing it. I mean, a lot of them just had one skill difficulty level. You know, I mean, even if you go 6 or 7 years beyond this and you look at the first sports games that were really gaining a lot of traction, like NHL 94, Tecmo Super Bowl, there were only one difficulty level in those games. And once you became too good to play against a computer in those, you had to find friends to play against that could challenge you. And Mike Tyson's Punch-Out did that without having to have a second player. And that's something that I really, really enjoy about Punch-Out, and I've never beaten it, but if you have, you'll remember it for the rest of your life. Another game in 1987 is RBI Baseball. And I personally prefer Bad News Baseball for this. If you like baseball games, especially old baseball games, I highly recommend that you check out Bad News Baseball. You don't get any real players in that game, which could be a little disappointing, but you know, none of the people who were around for the 1987 season are still going to be there today. Also in 1987, Tecmo Bowl, released for the NES of, oh boy, I just dropped my tablet that I'm doing my research off of. I hope that didn't rupture anybody's eardrums out there. But Tecmo Bowl came out in 1987, and it started to shape sports games, not boxing, but like the team sports. It started to really get those games moving into a direction where they start to resemble something like we see today in sports video games. It was only 9v9. It wasn't 11 versus 11 like its successor was, but Tecmo Bowl laid the foundation for what came out a few years later in Tecmo Super Bowl, which many people still revere as the best sports video game of all time. Tecmo Bowl, it was easy to learn, difficult to master. Just like Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, you could go in there and you could beat Glass Joe, or you know, you could beat some of the lesser teams on Tecmo Bowl. I'm trying to not get it confused with the one that came out after it, because this Tecmo Bowl did not have all of the teams in the game. I know some of the best were the 49ers, or just San Francisco as they were known in the game, and Chicago. You know, San Francisco had Jerry Rice, and Chicago had Walter Payton. And if you could get the ball into any of those guys' hands, it was really bad news for the defense in these. In 1989, we were introduced to Golden Tee Golf, and if you've been into a bar in America at any point over the last 20 years, then I bet you've seen a rendition of Golden Tee Golf. When this came out, nobody had ever seen anything like it in terms of a golf game being fun. Before that, golf games were so slow, so plodding, so precise. It took forever to read the greens. It took forever to hit your shot. You had to be precise to what seemed like the millisecond when it came to swinging your club. When Golden Tee came out, it's just down on the trackball and up on the trackball, and you get a nice satisfying sound, or the whoosh. Your dude hitting the ball, you know, it flies through the air really quickly in real time, which is something that hadn't happened before. If you look at sports games on the Super Nintendo, or I'm sorry, golf games on the Super Nintendo or the NES, that you either saw it come off the tee and then it switched to an overhead view, or if you did see the ball flying through the air in some of the games like PGA Tour 96, it was so slow that it felt like there was about one frame every second, and it took like 10 frames for your ball to fly through the air. It was absolutely unbearable. But Golden Tee took something like golf and made it so that it was mainstream fun. Something like Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, where it was so fun that it transcended demographics in terms of who the normal audience should be. You know, in 1987, if you were a gamer, you probably lived in your parents' basements and you had these really thick glasses and a pocket protector, and I'm going to play video games today, Dungeons and Dragons. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Did not care about that. It didn't matter if you were that guy, or you were just some sports fan, or you were somebody just seeing a Nintendo for the first time. You go in there and play that game, and it's going to entertain you. And that's what Golden Tee Golf did on something that maybe even a little bit more under the radar than a boxing game, because a boxing game, there's a lot of action in boxing. In golf, there's not so much action, believe it or not. So to all of a sudden have a golf game be a staple in bars and arcades around the world, you have to realize just how entertaining this game has to be gripping people into dumping their quarters into it. I think this list may go in chronological order. Yeah, that's what I'm looking at. I didn't realize it until now. I thought it was ranked in order. So if, you see something like Madden 19 on the end of this list, that doesn't mean they're saying it was the best game of all time. They're just saying it was in the top 30 and was the most recent. And I really, really, really hope they don't have any recent Madden game on here within the last 5 years, actually. We're on NHL 94 now, and this game was one of the staples of my childhood. Holy cow, was I a big Buffalo Sabres fan, and was I a big Pat LaFontaine fan. And this game was a huge part of it. I still remember, having Grant Fuhrer, Dominic Hasek between the goalposts, and then Pat LaFontaine, Alex McGillney, and Yuri Himalev. You could even substitute Dale Howardchuk in for Himalev there, and I know that these names are meaning very little to most of you out there, but to 10-year-old, 5-year-old me, these were the freaking names to be. I loved Pat LaFontaine, and I absolutely adore NHL 94. The show's called Unpopular Opinions, so I'm going to state mine right now. The Super Nintendo version was better than the Sega Genesis version. I feel like the Super Nintendo version was more crisp. It controlled better. The Sega Genesis version, it seemed clunky. And I just was never a person that liked the grittiness of the Sega Genesis sound chip. Now, I know that the grittiness that many people have come to love, it was simply out of necessity because it couldn't produce the high quality sound that the Super Nintendo could, so it didn't try to. It tried to be a little bit more gritty and dirty and adult. But for this particular game especially, I just feel like the sounds that the Super Nintendo was able to put out really, really made this game better on the Super Nintendo than it was on the Genesis. And I know I'm really, really in the minority there, and you had to have grown up playing this on a Super Nintendo to even begin to say that, but I just like the way the players look and feel better. It feels like you have more control over your players on the Super Nintendo version. What was also cool about this game is they also got the San Jose Sharks Arena organ player to do actual organ recordings for all of these sounds that you would hear in the arena on an NHL game day. And back when this came out in 1993, this was just absolutely mind-boggling. Like, I am playing as Pat LaFontaine, my beloved Buffalo Sabres, and I get to hear the "Let's Go Buffalo" organ going. And you know, when I'm a kid going to these sports games, I used to think that it was a life or death scenario, that I could get this fake sound meter going all the way to the extreme on the Jumbotron. And holy cow, about 50% of my time at a hockey game underneath the age of 10 was just spent screaming at the top of my lungs. It must have been brutal for the people sitting next to me, but I figured it was up to me yelling "Let's go Buffalo" loud enough that my boys would put one in the back of the net. Also, in 1993, NBA Jam came out, and this was an NBA Jam Tournament Edition, which is probably a better game in every facet, but this one was the original. It was the OG. You know what I'm saying? And it made an arcade style, not because it couldn't handle putting 10 players onto the court. The Super Nintendo could absolutely handle that. Whereas something like the NES, you're not going to be able to have really, really nice renderings of a number of players, you know, once you get above 2, 4, 6. It's going to be really, really tough for the NES to put 10 quality renderings out there all at once. You're going to run into the flickering and stuff like you do in Tecmo Super Bowl. They absolutely could put 10 players onto the court, but they knew that they had a formula for fun. This game was a smash hit in the arcades, and it was just as fun on the home console. Probably one of the best arcade to console ports of the 90s. A year later, we got Ken Griffey Jr. Presents Major League Baseball. And this was a little bit of a mix between arcade and simulation, because you had accurate stats, you had the accurate team names and cities, but these players in the game, they're not real, and all of the teams had players based on some sort of theme. If I remember correctly, the Philadelphia Phillies had characters named after the Rocky series, because that took place in Philadelphia. And these guys were juiced. Like, they were not accurate portrayals of what a human being should look like. Like, I'm looking at a screenshot right now of Jay Hunt, whoever he is, looking at his arms right now, and they're absolutely massive. I mean, he looks like freaking King Kong out there with those forearms. It's absolutely unbelievable. Ken Griffey Jr. was the only licensed player in the game, so that means the rest of them were all made up besides Ken Griffey Jr., but it didn't matter. This game was just fun. Also in 1994, Cruisin' USA came out, and that was an arcade game that was later ported I remember it being on the N64, and it wasn't quite as good on the N64. It's one of those games today that's pretty cheap because a lot of people had it back in the day, but it wasn't like a top tier title like one of the Mario first party games. So if you're looking to play some Cruisin' USA today, this along with, I would say, NHL 94 would be another cheap one that you could pick up and try these games out today. Now, this next one, Mario Kart 64, which I don't even know if this is quite a sports game, but I guess it's racing, and so, you know, racing is considered a sport. It's definitely not a simulation. But Mario Kart 64, while I think Super Mario Kart was a little bit more influential and it really turned Nintendo onto the idea to making 10 sequels, Mario Kart 64 was probably the most popular Mario Kart. Like when you just say Mario Kart to an audience of 100 people, this is the game that half of their minds would go to. And I didn't grow up with an N64, and maybe this guy in Tiebreaker did, so I'm just going to read you what he said. This is it, the racing game to end all racing games, Mario Kart 64. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about the insane popularity surrounding the Mario Kart franchise, though it wasn't easy picking between this and the original Super Mario Kart. Yeah, I mean, I think that Super Mario Kart was a little bit more groundbreaking because there hadn't been a kart racer genre yet. Like, it invented a genre. It wasn't pretending to be in spaceships. It wasn't pretending to be in super fast cars. You know, you felt like you were going maybe like 20 miles an hour around a track as Bowser, but it was so freaking fun that we've now got, what, 8, 9 sequels out of it? For the ultimate fun extraction on either version, inviting 3 friends over for 4-player action is an absolute must. Little typo there, I had to paraphrase. Although you couldn't do 4 players on the Super Nintendo version, only the N64. As frustrating as it is being in first place for the entire time, then the computer players suddenly become extremely competitive in the final leg of the race. We'll take the easy controls any day. The main issue with the Super Nintendo version was, well, you had to actually have hand-eye coordination. And we don't have time for trying or talent. Man, the 150cc version of Super Mario Kart is absolutely brutal. I beat it one time in my life, and that was only when I had my brother, being player 2, driving backwards on Rainbow Road trying to block the other racers for me. That game was hard. Nintendo hard, if you will. 1997 came Backyard Baseball, and this was a staple of my childhood. Holy cow, Backyard Baseball was fun. I can still tell you my lineup. We had Ricky Johnson on the mound, Mikey Thomas at catcher, Pete Wheeler might play a little first base, Stephanie something was the shortstop. She loved being shortstop. Pablo Sanchez could play a mean third base. Pete Wheeler actually may have been in center, but then you had Amir and Ahmed Khan at the corners in the outfield, and those boys could hit. Backyard Baseball, It was the perfect game for kids to get into sports video games. It did have levels of difficulty. It had very, very interesting characters. We had Kenny Kawaguchi, who was in a wheelchair and out there playing just as well as any of his friends. All sorts of different ethnicities, genders. Everyone was just out there playing baseball, having a good time. And if it wasn't for the success of this game, we never would have seen backyard hockey, backyard basketball, backyard football, backyard soccer. So when a game comes out like this, like Mario Kart, and spawns 10 sequels, you know that it had to be popular. NFL Blitz, on the cover, Cordell Stewart. Now, this was an awesome arcade game, and I remember playing this on all sorts of different platforms, being really disappointed by the Game Boy version of it, which my mom bought me for my birthday. And, you know, I wasn't going to say, hey, Mom, this game sucks, but I was a little disappointed when I played it because I had played the N64 in the arcade versions, and those games were nuts. It was like Tecmo Bowl. It was like Tecmo Bowl felt like 10 years earlier, but like if it was on crack cocaine. Does that make sense? If it was like if an ordinary football game was on crack cocaine. And I use that crack cocaine analogy a lot to describe sitcoms, when sitcoms like kind of get edgy and more wild and they take a basis that was set for it 10 years earlier. A good example of that is I say that It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is like Seinfeld on crack cocaine. It's got a group of 3 guys and 1 girl always hanging out, always getting up to mischief, except in Seinfeld, they're just kind of like selfish people, and they get themselves into a lot of trouble by being selfish people. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, they're just criminals. They're out doing hard drugs. They're drinking and driving. You know, they're stealing gasoline and selling it all over the city illegally. Like, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is like if you had a friend watch Seinfeld while on drugs and then had them explain Seinfeld to you. That's what NFL Blitz was compared to other football games at the time. Gran Turismo, and it says 1997/98. I don't know if that's just Gran Turismo 1 and Gran Turismo 2, but what I remember about the original Gran Turismo is it being incredibly difficult to pass the driving test to get your license. Now, Gran Turismo 2 was a little bit easier to do that things. Also, if you had a Gran Turismo 1 save file on your memory card, it would transfer over all of the licenses that you had acquired on Gran Turismo 1 into Gran Turismo 2, so you didn't have to do that again, which was very, very nice. And I know that I spent a lot of hours playing Gran Turismo 2 as a kid, and it was not really my style. It was a sim racing game that wasn't NASCAR on oval tracks. But it was really, really fun. And when these games transcend the genre that they're in, that's how you know you have a really, really special game. Like Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. Like Gran Turismo. I will never, ever in my life watch some race of rally cars going through the Swiss Alps. As talented and as awesome as that may be, it just doesn't interest me. But I got Gran Turismo 2 with my PS1 when my grandma gave those things to me for my birthday. And I played the bejesus out of Gran Turismo 2. 1998 came 1080 snowboarding. A few snowboarding games had been released over the years before 1080 snowboarding came out in 1998, but this N64 masterpiece set the standard for top-tier shredding. There are two major components about the game that made it so true to the entire N64 experience. Computer players that suddenly master the game in the final leg of the race, Mario Kart, and gravity-defying acrobatics. As much air as you could catch in this game, what was actually just as impressive was how realistic the play was. That sounds contradictory, but this is more in the sense that busting out a 1080 isn't just going to happen every time you hit a jump. It balanced massive potential for insane tricks with technical controls that actually lend to real snowboarding knowledge. Beautiful. I didn't have a bit of snowboarding knowledge. I've never played 1080 snowboarding. I have played some of the Cool Boarders games on PlayStation. Those were pretty fun, so I would imagine that if 1080 was your snowboarding game of choice, then you could have gotten really, really into it, especially if it was better than Cool Boarders, because I remember those not being a particularly legendary game, but really, really fun to play for 10 or 15 minutes at a time with a friend. And if you went over to a friend's house and they had Cool Boarders, or somebody came over and you had Cool Boarders, that was one you could pick up and rely on to not entertain you for hours, but to get a few good races out of it. In 1999, we saw Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and this is another thing like Gran Turismo with rally racing, I guess you would call. I don't know what it means when you're not just going around an oval track, but what Gran Turismo did with that type of racing and what Mike Tyson's Punch-Out did with boxing is it made a genre or a type of sport that very few people were interested in and became a mega hit in video games. Way more people have played Tony Hawk's Pro Skater than have ever actually tried to skateboard in real life or even come near a skateboard. Now imagine if that was true imagine if somehow MLB games had more players than had ever thrown a baseball before. It's absolutely unimaginable. Like, that sounds unreasonable, absolutely wild. But that is how good Tony Hawk's Pro Skater was. From the first time you dropped down in that hangar and smashed through that pane of glass, you knew you were playing a really fun game, whether you like skateboarding or not. And that's how this ends up on the list of the top 30 sports games ever. On here's Big Buck Hunter, and I don't know if that's just an arcade release or if it's, yeah, it looks like they're talking about the light gun shooter arcade release. Really cool, awesome. If you like Big Buck Shooter, let me know. I've never played it, not going to do too much commenting. In 2000, we had Mario Tennis, and I've talked about this game before. Me and my friends, we all love Mario Tennis. It's one of those games where the depth gets more deep the longer you play. Is that even a saying? The depth gets more deep? I don't know if that's grammatically correct, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean is you can jump on and you can put it on an easy difficulty and you can just hit A to put it back and forth over the net. Or if you're playing with an inexperienced friend, you hit A, you hit it over the net, you move a little bit, you try to hit it where they ain't. But as you get better at this game, skills and strategies develop that you had no idea existed when you were first booting this game up. And it's not a chore to learn them. This game is so fun to play, and then you kind of organically discover these strategies as you're going along. So you know, hey, my opponent's playing a little too far to their baseline. I'm going to hit them with the drop shot, and then I know they're probably going to get that, but then I'm going to try to lob it to the right corner, and if they get that, then I'm going to overhand smash it back to the left side. And you start thinking 3 moves ahead, and all the time while you're doing that, your opponent's thinking like, hey, this guy's going to try to drop shot me because I'm so far back. I'm going to scoot up to the net, and then I'm going to slam it home when he tries to hit me with the drop shot. There were just different tiers in terms of skill. How you would play the game after you've played it for 2 hours versus after you've played it for 200 hours, it's like they're not even the same game anymore, but it's not a chore to get there. You just enjoy the game so much, even though you're not very good at it, that you keep playing until you are good at it. And the addictive gameplay, all of the different characters to try out, the different courts, the different modes, made Mario Tennis way more fun than any tennis game has a right to be. I mean, when you boil tennis down, it's just big ping pong. You compare it to something like basketball, which has 5 uber athletic guys on each team jumping so that their hands are 12 feet in the air and slamming this ball down and ripping it away from each other, compared to tennis is 2 people hitting things back and forth over a net. So when you get a video game that has made hitting something back and forth over the net into something that you are willing to put 1,000 hours into because it's so fun, you know that you've designed a really, really good and fun game, which is why the Mario sports series are so popular, whether it's Mario Kart or they had Mario Super Sluggers Baseball. I like Mario Golf. Mario Golf's pretty fun to me. And again, how many people are playing golf? I bet you that just about as many people who have ever gone and tried to play actual tennis in real life have played Mario Tennis at some point. And don't even get me started about the excellent Game Boy Color port. An RPG and a tennis game all rolled into one. It's like the NBA My Career 20 years before NBA My Career existed. Maybe 10. I don't know when they actually started with the My Career, but without the microtransactions, like a really fair progression system like you would find in Pokemon or some JRPG or something like that, where it didn't necessarily feel like a grind. You weren't pumping real money into it. Your Game Boy Color couldn't connect to the internet. You know, it was going to be used as a paperweight before it was ever used as a supercomputer. But this game was fun. We didn't need to connect online. We didn't need to play against other people in our career mode. We'll just play against the computer, and it's going to be so fun that we're going to put the time into it it requires to become good. Also on this list, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, which is not quite as revolutionary as Pro Skater 1. But it introduced a manual, so it kind of doubled the size of the game, because now you could manual once you landed a trick and keep your combo going, and the amount of points you could score in a run just exponentially increased, which made it more fun. It gave you more goals to try to accomplish. Also in 2000, WWF No Mercy, and I'm going to be honest with you, for as big of a wrestling fan as I am not well versed in the N64 and PlayStation era of wrestling games. I really, really like the Super Nintendo wrestling games, particularly WWF Royal Rumble for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. I just wish that Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair would have been available on both editions of that game. Instead, they split them up to make the Sega Genesis owners feel like their version's better because they got Hulk Hogan, and make the Super Nintendo people feel like their version's better because they got Ric Flair, so both of them have to buy them because they don't feel like they're getting the inferior version. When WWF No Mercy came out, though, this was right in what I see as kind of a difficult period for sports video games. Because what you had games moving to 3D maybe before the consoles were really ready for it. You know what I mean? Like if you look at a game from the 90s, we'll talk about one that's already been on this list, NHL 94, you've got sprite-based players and everything's really clean and you can easily tell where all of these dudes are on the rink, where one player stops and another player begins. When we moved into 3D, the early days of it especially, these polygons were messy. And in sports wrestling games, I think that's one of the examples you can see it best. Wrestling, football, hockey, basketball, where a bunch of people are all going to be in close proximity to each other and maybe interacting with each other, these polygons could get muddied. Now, I'm sure I've played WWF No Mercy, but I couldn't tell you what separates it from its predecessors like WWF WrestleMania 2000, so I'm just going to read what they wrote on tiebreaker.com. WWF No Mercy continued to build off all its wrestling video game predecessors regarding hits and grapples. Despite so many similarities throughout the game to its contemporary, WWF WrestleMania 2000, it was the superior controls that made this so lovable. It is regarded as one of the best wrestling video games ever made. And I gotta stop drinking pop during these podcasts in general, but especially when I don't have a co-host, because there's no time for me to, put my head away from the mic and let out a little fizzy burp every once in a while, and you guys can really tell when I'm heaving over here. Prior to No Mercy, controls were always a bit glitchy. Finally, pulling off moves didn't have to feel like button mashing. On top of that, a ton of customizable settings for customizing characters were made available, and isn't the glitz and glam really what it's all about? I can definitely respect people who enjoy WWF No Mercy, but that era of games, of sports games in particular, and if you want to break it down even more than that, wrestling games just were not for me. I am familiar with NHL Hits 2002, although I prefer NHL Hits 2003. NHL Hits 2002, what I really like about that one is, one, Dominic Hasek was in the game, which he was not in 2003. Although he wasn't on the Buffalo Sabres, he was on the Detroit Red Wings. And this game was like the NFL Blitz, but not just, okay, we're going to take the S off the name and we're going to put a Z and we're going to make it way more intense. It was comparable to NFL Blitz in the way that it was awesome. Does that make sense? Like we're not just changing a bunch of things for the sake of changing it. We're changing these things to be way more awesome than what they would normally be. You get in a fight in this game, and your player has to leave the ice if you lose for the rest of the game, and he's substituted by what's probably a less skilled player, assuming you're going to pick your best ones to go out there. And then there are layers of strategy develop, like, hey, maybe we send out the big boppers, the real enforcers early, and try to knock out some of the opponent's speedsters. And we'll see what happens after that, and I'll get my scores in there the second or third period. A 3-on-3 format made the game so much quicker, and it's probably what inspired the NHL to go to 3v3 overtimes today. Moving on the list, SSX Tricky, that's a tongue twister. SSX Tricky 2001, again, I'd never played it, but I'm not going to dispute the inclusion on this list. Just because I've never played it doesn't mean it's not an awesome game, and I'm sure a lot of people have a lot of good memories of SSX Tricky. NBA Street Volume 2, I also didn't play a ton of, but I do know that that game was awesome because it had so many different generations of Michael Jordan on it. He was playable in the game on the Washington Wizards because he was active in the NBA at the time. Then they had a rookie version of him back from the 80s, and then like a 90s championship winning Michael Jordan. The one thing I remember about this game is you could get a tall dude and just put him right under the basket and reject everything, which I don't think was as common in the first one. But From what I hear in the story mode and everything, NBA Street just took what NBA Street Volume 2 took what the first one did and made it more in depth, more customizable, more fun. NCAA Football 2004, I didn't have this version. I believe I had 2005 with a Larry Fitzgerald on the cover, who was drafted into the NFL in 2004 and still plays there today. I just got him on my fantasy team during our draft last night. Fantasy players out there, let me tell you something. Nobody cares about your lineup. I barely care about my own lineup. I don't care about your lineup. If you are my best friend, maybe I'll care what you're doing with your lineup, or I respect your NFL knowledge, and I'm looking for help with my lineup. But really, that's just an excuse for me to talk about my lineup. Please, guy talking about your fantasy team to other people, check and see if they're interested first. If they yawn at all during any point, they're really, really not interested in hearing about whether you're going to start Peyton Manning or Eli Manning next week. Fantasy guy, don't tell other people about your team unless solicited, please. To all the other people out there who are not super into fantasy football, I am a decent NFL fan. I followed the league for 25 years. I play fantasy football casually, and I still could not give a rip about who's on your bench and who's not, or who you might pick up off the waiver wires. The only reason I brought up my fantasy team was say, like, hey, look, Larry Fitzgerald is still in the league. 2019, man, he was playing back in 2004. What was released even before Larry Fitzgerald was in the league in 2004 was Tiger Woods PGA Tour 2004, which was released in 2003. I didn't play this one. I played Tiger Woods PGA Tour 2002 and 2005 were the ones that I had. Because when I'm 10 years old, it's much harder to convince my parents to buy me a sports game every year than it is for me to just decide to go out and do that as an adult with my own money. So that, you didn't play every game every year, unless one of your parents or your big brother who had a job was buying these things every year. Def Jam Fight for New York 2004. When I first started seeing this game in best of lists and like reviews of it and stuff, I thought it must have been like a little tongue-in-cheek thing. Like it was a secret that I wasn't in on because I had never played the game, and I've still never played the game. But I've crossed over from being a skeptic of this game to like, hey, if this many people speak this highly of a game with Snoop Dogg as a playable character, a fighting game with Snoop Dogg as a playable character, it's actually probably pretty good. And 15 years later, we're still seeing it in top video game lists. Along with Madden NFL 2005, which came out in 2004, I liked Madden NFL 2006 better. One, because it had my favorite NFL player of all time, Donovan McNabb, on the cover. But also because I didn't mind the passing cone that came with that game. And when NFL 2005 introduced the hit stick, it made offense feel a little bit underpowered because they were getting creamed. Now in 2006, we had the truck stick. Man, I remember running over more than one defensive back with Donovan McNabb, and then you'd get awesome power running backs like Jerome Bettis. Boy, I used to play like the training camp drills just as Jerome Bettis, because I wanted to see how many cornerbacks I could plow over with that truck stick. Madden NFL 2005 and 2006 were both great. Madden 2005 was the last game that Emmitt Smith was in, and Madden 2006 was the last one that Jerry Rice was in as playable players, playable characters. And that always does a little something for me. Like, I would probably rather play NBA Live 2003 as opposed to NBA Live 2004, because in 2003 you had Michael Jordan still in the game. I like NBA 2K5 instead of NBA 2K6 because it was the last time Scottie Pippen was playable. And when you get these legends at the end of their careers and they're kind of a shell of themselves, it's always very interesting to me, because just like how I'm in love with the band Queen today, I'm going out there and I know that Brian May is probably not given 110% like he was in 1979. And it's not Freddie Mercury, but it's Brian May and Roger Taylor, and like those are the idols. There's a reason why the Wizards were so well attended in 2002, 2003, even though they weren't good. It was because it was Michael Jordan's last season ever. Well, we thought it was his last season ever because he'd fooled us once or twice before. But now we're pretty sure it's his last season ever. People wanted to see Michael Jordan, whether he was playing for the Bulls or not, whether he could go up and have a 40-inch vertical. It didn't matter. You were still watching Michael Jordan. So that's always something for me to go back and look for in these old games. Like, what were the rosters like? Who were some of the legends? I mean, in Madden 2005, you conceivably could have had some guys that were like playing in the 80s. Isn't that incredible? Like in Madden 20... you can play as Tom Brady, who was a player on Madden 2001. Adam Vinatieri has been in the NFL since like 1996. It makes kicking a field goal fun when you get to do it with this legend. And it's just a little bonus when they're like an active player as opposed to somebody they're bringing back as a legend. FIFA 07. I never played this. I played FIFA 08, so I'm going to read to you what Tiebreaker says. Literally everything that can be improved in terms of video game development has been improved in the FIFA series since FIFA 07, but this edition remains a fan favorite for good reason. FIFA 07 remains so popular for its simplicity as much as its advanced gameplay. Ball control became more lifelike than ever, but the number of tricks and moves made this edition feel like a two-button Nintendo game to the ones of today. And that's a very nice thing for casual gamers. It's also about the little things. No more waiting around in silence as the mini one-on-one game trying to score on a goal. It gave us something to do to pass the time. Loading times used to be brutal, and they still are when you're just looking at a blank screen, but this was one of the first games. I don't remember anything before this in a sports game giving you a mini game as things were loading. And I'm not saying that that's what made FIFA 07 good enough to include it on this list. All I know is that when I was playing FIFA 08, that was the edition I played because, again, I was a child. You know, I was 14 years old when FIFA 08 came out. I'm not going to be able to afford every game every year, so I didn't play FIFA 07. I did play FIFA 08, and I love that arena mode. My brother found some way where you could kick the ball out of the stadium, and we would spend hours just doing that. Like, see, you could kick the ball out of the stadium the most times in a row without failing. Moving on, and we're getting toward the end of the list here. NCAA Basketball 10. I've never been one for college sports. I barely care about the college sports that I'm playing in. My motto is I'll wait until they're in the pros and I'll watch the best of the best. Now, even I can't disagree that kids in college play with passion, and that's what makes March Madness such an extravagant event every year, because you see these kids literally playing for their basketball lives out there. And you don't see that very much in the NBA. You don't see that a ton. It's not like, you know, Steph Curry's running around out there in his 5th consecutive finals and you're really pulling for him because you know that he's done after this year and he has to go into the senior basketball circuit after this. But that's what the feeling is in March Madness. And that's why so many people like NCAA and like NCAA games. Now, I think the last football game was NCAA football 14. I'm not sure when the last NCAA basketball was, but I know this was one of the later ones and within the last 5 releases. NCAA Basketball 10 tops out all of its preceding editions, but it's a bittersweet victory as a beautiful piece of art never had another edition succeed it. So there you go. That was the last game. The last NCAA, because, you've run into these things where the NCAA is making so much money off it and the players are getting nothing. I don't know exactly what happened, but that was the reason that they don't make these games anymore. NBA 2K11, and I think that this is the best modern sports game. It was everything that any NBA fan ever dreamed NBA 2K11 could be. And you tell me when the last time we saw that is, because I guarantee you, I promise you, nobody is picking up Madden 20 and being like, you know what, this is probably like the best game I've ever played. But people were doing that when NBA 2K11 came out. The gameplay was redone, and the Michael Jordan legend inclusion absolutely blew my mind. I was a freshman in college, and I was at GameStop's door day one because I knew that I had to get my hands on this. Michael Jordan was coming back. Like I just said, I've always been nostalgic for the days of yesteryear, and I always love seeing clips of Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson and Larry Bird running around. And now this game was going to let you play as them, and one of the main focuses of the game. This wasn't an afterthought. Before, you could play as Michael Jordan on the NBA 90s team, in NBA 2K8 or whatever, but you couldn't play with his teammates. You couldn't play against his rivals. It was an afterthought. It was like, hey, let's include Larry Bird and Michael Jordan as an afterthought. These guys who built the NBA into what it is today. Larry Bird and Magic Johnson came in the 1979 draft, and the NBA changed forever. And once Michael Jordan got in there and started playing a brand of basketball that was different, we had never seen anyone fly this high and dominate this much against other elite athletes on the basketball court than what we saw when Michael Jordan came in. He made the NBA into what it is. There would be no Michael Jordan without Larry Bird and there'd be no LeBron James without Michael Jordan, without Larry Bird. I don't know, maybe there would be a Michael Jordan without Larry Bird, but scratch that, because that's not what I was trying to say at all. What I'm saying is these individual stars. Michael Jordan transcended basketball. Now, I don't know if NBA 2K11 transcended genres where anybody who owned a PS3 had to have it, like Mike Tyson's Punch-Out did, where, hey, I know this is a sports game, man, and you don't play sports games, but Mike Tyson's Punch-Out is so fun, you got to give it a try. I don't know if NBA 2K11 did that, but what I do know is that anybody who had ever played a basketball game before was now playing something better when they were playing NBA 2K11. Now, I don't know if there's been a sports game since where it's come out and we're like, yeah, this is the best version of this sports game. This year, I don't think when NBA 2K19 came out, we're like, this is better than 18. It's better than 17, better than 16. This is the best NBA game I've ever played. Which, in theory, should be happening because you're giving them $60 every year for something that's supposed to be new. In NBA 2K11, you got your money's worth. And we don't see that enough. We don't see that enough in video games anymore, where people are creating something new. And I talked about it last episode. Go back and listen to it if you're interested in hearing about it at all. This is what my theory is. Getting sports games back in the good graces of players is put out one sports game every 5 years with a new engine and update the rosters as you're working on the new engine. If you can't put a new engine out every year and make this game substantially better, and you're just going to put more microtransactions in it and a slightly higher number in the title and tell me I'm getting a new game, then I would much prefer to be playing the game from 5 years ago with updated rosters. I'll even pay you $10 every year to get me the updated rosters. Maybe you'd even make your money back, but you'd be seen as better in the eyes of your consumers. What happened to the customer is always right. We don't see it in sports games anymore, but we saw it in NBA 2K11. They gave people what they knew the people wanted. And they made what I think is probably the best sports game of the last 10 years. Now, tiebreaker.com might disagree with me because their last entry on this list is even newer than NBA 2K11. UFC Undisputed 3, 2012. I've never played it, so I'm going to read you what they said about it. We had to give a little love to some real MMA video game action with the UFC Undisputed 3. UFC Undisputed 3 is leaps and bounds ahead of its predecessor with way more realistic fighter movements, and the grappling is no longer just button mashing with closed eyes. Best of all is Pride Mode. Dance down the street as a rainbow-clad warrior in this year's Gay Pride Parade. Nah, I'm just kidding. Pride was like an extreme MMA league or promotion or whatever you want to call it. Pride Mode allowed fighters to fight like Pride rules rather than UFC rules. Head kicks to a grounded opponent all day, baby. That's their words, not mine. Making legit MMA game is still in its early stages with few to have been... Boy, Tiebreaker really lowered their grammar standards for this. What they're trying to say here is that MMA games are hard to make, and we haven't even had a ton of them left. But this article came out, I believe it was 2018, and it only had one game since NBA 2K11 came out to today, and that was UFC Undisputed. And it even says in this last sentence, it's filled with more than its fair share of problems too, unfortunately. So I would assume that NBA 2K11 is better than it, and since they don't have any games listed after that, I think it's safe to say that NBA 2K11 was the best sports game in the last 10 years. And at least according to this list, and maybe even according to me, because just the level of excitement, it reinvigorate. I'm 50 minutes into this podcast, and all of a sudden, something just comes in and donkey punches me, and I'm like, holy cow, man! Holy Toledo! I remember this thing. This thing was awesome. No sports game has made me feel like that lately. I played a ton of FIFA 15. I played a ton of it. I was really, 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 really good at FIFA 15. They've got this tier system, and I went to the top tier where you're supposed to be playing the top players from across the world, and you're only playing against opponents in this top tier, and I swept them in my season and went the equivalent of 10-0 or whatever, or however many games I had to win. I did it in a row with 0 losses. And I'm not bragging. I'll even admit that's a little sad because I used to play a lot of FIFA 15. It was probably the sports game I put the most time into in the last 10 years. And I'm only saying that. I'm only bragging about how good I am at FIFA 15 so that I can get a bunch of women. Because women love FIFA 15 players. Get a bunch of women. And to tell you how good NBA 2K11 was. Because if I put that much time into FIFA 15 to become that good at, and I am not that good at games, I became that good at FIFA 15 because I loved it. Right? I do not just jump on Call of Duty and go 15-3. I don't. I go 1-8. For 3 months before I ever get my KD over a 1. I'm just trying to play the objective, man. Who's not trying to play the objective are these people releasing the sports games today. Doesn't it tell you something that no game on this list is released in the last 6 years? 6 years! We got to go back to NBA 2K11 to find a game that really revolutionized the way you play that series. And I'm not expecting sports games to be able to do that every year. Madden's had 25 editions now, and I'm not expecting 25 times of mind-blowing experiences. I am expecting not to be insulted, though. And that's what I feel like every time I'm buying these new sports games with their unchanged gameplay and more microtransactions and updated rosters. That has been every sports video game for the last 3 to 5 years. More microtransactions, essentially the same gameplay, updated rosters. The games on this list did not do that. And I hope that this list made you think about what you really want out of a video game so that you can speak with your wallets. Guys, if you are on the fence, don't buy NBA 2K20. Don't buy Madden 20. Wait for the game that people are going to be talking about 8 years from now, and then let's make them do that every year. And if they can't do that every year, show a little respect to us. Release something every 3 years. And until you can get a new, better engine in that game, give me updated rosters for $10 every year. Because you are taking people out of your audience. Think about the people who have been so loyal to so many series for so long that are now just saying, listen, I can't do it anymore. It's the same, but with more microtransactions. Anyway, guys, this is the first ever solo episode of Unpopular Opinions. I know you didn't enjoy it as much as you would have, as if I would have had anyone or anything else here with me. But just the way things shook out, it's just me yelling at a microphone for an hour and a minute thus far. And that's where I'm going to wrap it up. I'm not going to put your ears through any more of that, okay? I'm done. Thanks. If you stuck with me, guys, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it. Get me on Twitter or something, at Rytoff. You just tell me you made it to this timestamp in this episode. Maybe I'll send you some troll coin or something. I'm so thankful for any of you guys listening out there. I hope you're agreeing with my unpopular opinion that NBA 2K11 is what we need to strive for if we're going to be dumping $60 on sports video games every year. Not just NBA 2K11, all of these games on this list that I mentioned. I want to feel just once, every 5 years, that's all I'm asking for, just once, feel like I felt the first time I played Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. I'm like, wow, this new game is really cool. This is fun. Feel like I did when I booted up NHL 94. Like, this is a great game. I played a lot of FIFA 15. I didn't feel the excitement for it like I did for NBA 2K11. The amount of modes that they added, and the improvements that they made. And they told us about those improvements in the advertisements and stuff. Nowadays, they're selling us things as improvements that are not. For example, now NBA 2K20 is touting that they have the all-decade teams. Well, they had that in NBA 2K8. They just took it out. Now they're trying to get people to buy this game based on a feature that they had removed 10 years ago. They've got the WNBA. NBA Live has had that for 2 or 3 years. Give me something new. Give me something good. And until you can, give me something every 4 years. Every 4 years is about how often one of my episodes should come out. Holy cow, I'm getting all sweaty. I was doing good until like these last 10 minutes. Anyways, guys, I'm Ryan. This has been Unpopular Opinions. You've been awesome. One more thanks to our sponsor, eToro. That's going to wrap it up. I don't know where you're listening or when you're listening, but I sure am thankful that you stuck with me through all of this. One more time, I'm Ryan Toffel. This is Unpopular Opinions. Have a good evening. Have a good night, good morning, whatever. I don't care. Blah, blah, blah.